А там люди есть?
On the 25th of April, 1986, an explosion inside reactor number 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant changed hundreds of thousands of lives forever.
Не подтвердили, авария там произошла. У них это диспетчер в Припяти сказала. Пожарная охрана. Алло, Иванка. Да. Значит, вы выезжаете в Припять? Алло, да, я слышу. На атомную станцию выезжаете. Там третий, четвертый блок горит крыша. Алло, Полесская.
I visited on a tour, a day trip from Kiev, the capital of modern-day Ukraine. The closer you get to entering the exclusion zone, the less people and houses you see. A few checkpoints, some passport control, and you're in. The exclusion zone surrounding the Chernobyl plant covers an area of over 2,600 kilometers squared. Once inside, the trees turn red. The ground beneath them still contains some of the most radioactive patches of soil on the planet. Before heading to the power plant and the abandoned town of Pripyat, we first visited the Dugar radar, an anti-ballistic missile system left by the Soviet Union to rust in the midst of the exclusion zone. So let me explain a little bit briefly where we are now. We're not far from Pripyat. We're around halfway between Chernobyl town and Pripyat. Pripyat was the town of 50,000 people that was evacuated nearest to the power plant, which we'll be visiting later as well. Actually, Chernobyl town is 12 kilometers away from the power plant, but it was built first, and that's why the power plant is famously known as Chernobyl, although Pripyat town was actually the closest one. So now we're here at the anti-ballistic missile system, walking through just to reach it. As you can see, the wildlife is flourishing. Look at these old rustic signs. I shouldn't get too close to some things, but you can just see there. Can't touch anything, can't sit on the ground, don't eat or drink in the open air. A few rules to obey by. Nowadays, there would be absolutely no use for this anti-ballistic missile system. We have satellites. The Soviet Union spent millions building it. And now it's just left there, rusted and red. Today, you can really see how bare and untouched the land within the exclusion zone is. No one touches anything. Different pieces that have fallen off the old tower just lying around in the ground. It is absolutely huge. Look at that. .63. Just here is the nursery, the kindergarten I should say. One of the only remaining buildings in this area. Everything else was destroyed by liquidators. One of the few places outside the town of Pripyat which they didn't destroy, along with a World War II memorial. Shouldn't touch anything in here. Radiation's pretty high, look at this. Absolutely surreal with all these dolls around, and it really brings home the disaster when you can actually see a kindergarten, you know, the most innocent of places. back in the minivan, heading directly towards the site of the explosion. Stopping briefly to take in the scene from a distance, covered by a shining new sarcophagus, the worst of the radiation is kept at bay. So we're now here directly outside of the reactor, covered completely, reactor number 4. So right now today we're experiencing 1.1 immediately outside of the reactor. If you were to go deep beneath the ground where the elephant's foot is, I'll flash a picture of it right now, you would die within 3 minutes. It's around 400 or 500. 10 years ago, when this wasn't here, what would the reading average be?
6, 7.
6 or 7.
6 or 7.
Next up, it's Pripyat. 50,000 people used to live here. Now, it's a ghost town. So we're now in the town of Pripyat. The Soviet Union say that they evacuated the town after 1 day. In reality, it was 3 days after the initial reactor exploded. People were told they would be returning within the week. They never ever returned again. You can see here one of the buildings. Being careful not to touch anything. You can see all the rust. Whoa. So eerie. An entire town literally frozen in time. Let's go up the stairs. Doesn't feel real, like a movie set of an apocalyptic scenario. But this is actually it. Old basketball court here. Unbelievable. So surreal. You can see other apartments through the windows. Shows how much of daily life was disrupted. Lots of glass on the floor still from all the windows. As you can see, the textbooks here. This was an old school. Classroom. Whoa, so much dust down there. All the masks that have been dumped in the corner. This is what they look like up close. So we just left that second building with the school inside, and it's very difficult to calculate exactly how many people died or were affected as a result of the disaster. One thing for sure is that it's in the thousands. People of different generations, people all around Europe, not just here in Ukraine, other countries like Belarus have an exclusion zone as well. And it was Sweden, funnily enough, were the first country to raise the alarm after the Soviet Union tried to keep everything hush because the winds blew all across Europe, and then it was no secret anymore. One thing for sure is that many firefighters, the first, second and third wave of them who went to the power plant initially, and many people in the close vicinity at the time died. Old big concrete apartment blocks behind the trees of today's abandoned Pripyat. Walking through the old streets of Pripyat, there would have been nowhere near as many trees here. Everything is red, all the metal. This would have been a park just here. A few abandoned benches are left over. Easy to get lost with so many bushes and trees. Pathway isn't necessarily set. A place just where the pause button has been pressed since 1986. Nowhere quite like this in the world, perhaps. Wooden seats there in what was probably the sports area here, stadium. So this is what became of Pripyat, the old town of 50,000 people. Now a sea of vegetation, bushes and trees. Behind me, the famous Ferris wheel that has been renowned worldwide as the face of Chernobyl. Let's take a Geiger meter reading. 0.88. 21. 32. 50. Okay, moving my hand away. Earlier on, Xander and I were panicking when we got 2. And I just held that and it went to 50. Hopefully my fingers are all intact and I don't grow any extra pinkies or thumbs in the next few weeks. One estimate by the United Nations Committee says that up to 6,000 people, children and adolescents, were affected by the radiation to the extent they developed thyroid cancer, although some argue those figures are a little exaggerated. But for sure, cancer rates in the thousands from the disaster that happened here. Old supermarket, what's left of it anyway. I love seeing the old Russian signs that have rusted away and these communist logo or kind of flags of the Soviet Union. This whole square here would have been one of the main areas of Pripyat supermarket. We just came past the amusement park, big apartment blocks on each side of the square, and also more apartment blocks just behind me. Let me know in the comments below, having watched this video, would you now visit Chernobyl? Did you think it was very dangerous before and now you think, oh, maybe it's not so bad? Or would you just never visit?